Well, hello and good day to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another installment of our DNA Company webinar. And today, we are going to be speaking about peptides and their role in modern wellness. And I have the brilliant, illustrious, and handsome Justin Harris with us tonight, one of our fan favorites. Want to say hi, Justin?
Hey, Dr. Laura. I was actually going to refer to myself as handsome tonight, but seeing as you've already got it done, I'll spare everyone the agony of that. So my name's Justin. I'm a functional genomics practitioner for the DNA company, and you know, functional genomics is riddle solving in its own way. We're solving riddles at a high level. To be able to solve riddles, you have to be able to kind of think around corners a little bit. So one of the reasons why I'm so interested in peptides in this conversation tonight is because I think that while they're kind of burgeoning and legality and things is something we'll talk about a little bit, I think they represent an opportunity to fill in the gaps in places where your genes might not be serving you so well. And that's what our jobs are, right? I mean, we're here to find where those weak areas are, and then we construct a little toolkit, protocols, things that we can do to kind of reinforce these biological systems that your body is not getting the best case scenario of their coding for within your genes. So it's an exciting area. I think that peptides, while still a little bit controversial, albeit, do represent a body of work and knowledge that can actually help reinforce these areas and help people like you and I to solve these riddles. And that's what we're doing. We're solving riddles, and I love the more tools, the better, right? Why not?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, it is not just a localized interest, it is a global interest, and it is reflective on our audience tonight. I mean, I'm seeing some from Australia, New Zealand, Seattle, Washington, Vancouver, British Columbia, Toronto. We've got Illinois, Texas, Michigan, Netherlands. I mean, this is just amazing. We are so happy to have such a global audience. Croatia, there we go. I'll tell you, um, peptides have become such a buzzword. They really have come out to, be this new sexy, shiny thing. And it's really interesting because, the history of peptides actually goes back to the Cold War, when scientists and doctors were really looking into it. And so some of the things that we're going to be talking about today is we are going to explore some of the science behind peptides and also looking at, how are they used? Specifically, what we're going to touch on is muscle growth, looking at how we can improve skin health, boosting the immune function, supporting weight loss, also improving cognitive function, along with talking about some of the other more popular peptides for those of you who may, have done a little research of your own into it, that are often recommended. So something that I would like to put out there, we have a poll. So if our audience, if you wouldn't mind, please fill out that poll. We'd love to see what your knowledge is, to find out what your interests are concerning peptides. So, we'll give you a few minutes to fill that out and then take a look at the results. In the meantime, let's give a little primer about what peptides are, because it's like, again, that term gets thrown around and, but really, what is a peptide? And when we're talking about peptides, and especially about the ones that we are going to be talking about today, are bioregulatory peptides. So let's break that down and unpack that a little bit. So first of all, a peptide. Peptides are short chains of amino acids. Okay, so let's break that down a little bit more. Amino acids. Well, there's 20 amino acids that make up the proteins in our bodies. So amino acids. So these are things that you'll see like lysine, glycine, arginine, all of these that you might go, oh, wait a minute, that sounds familiar, because a lot of times you'll find them in supplements and in protein powders. And, there are 9 essential amino acids, meaning ones that our bodies either do not make or don't make enough of. So we have to get them from outside sources, mainly from our food, but other times from supplements. So of those amino acids, peptides are small chains of amino acids. So the amino acids stick together. So peptides are anywhere from 2 to 50 amino acids. So they're pretty short. Now, they are a bit different than proteins, mainly in size and structure. So we all know about proteins, and that's something that we talk about in our DNA, because when genes make and express proteins and enzymes, well, that's what they are. They're amino acids that get put together, but they're much longer. They're generally like 50 to 2,000 or more amino acids strung together, and they're folded in nice little packages, and form equals function for what they do. So these are very important, but that's the difference. Peptides, very small little proteins, and then your proteins are much larger. Now, peptides are very important, and they perform many essential functions in the human body. They actually interact with different sections of our DNA. They transfer information encoded in the amino acid sequence to control specific genes in specific tissues. So when we talk about or say bioregulatory peptides, what that is they regulate the information and the communication within the DNA and how the genes are activated and expressed. And that works into cellular regeneration. So it's really interesting that you probably wouldn't realize that insulin is a peptide. And this is actually, was the beginning and starts getting into the history of synthesizing peptides for specific use, and, working that into biohacking, being able to take that and to put it to use to get a certain result. Some of the things we're talking about, like I said, muscle strength enhancement, enhancing the immune system, doing and applying it for wound healing, weight loss, okay? It's taking natural peptides and making them isolated so that way we can do a certain job. So I would like to see, that should have given everyone enough time to fill out the poll. If we can bring up the poll results and take a look at what we've got. Beautiful, thank you. So our first question was, do you have existing knowledge about peptides? And I'll tell you what, nice to see we've got about a 50-50 yes and no. So I am so glad for those of you who already have some knowledge about it and those who want to continue to learn or to learn about them from scratch. This is fantastic. You're in the right place. Question 2. How have you used or are using peptides? Well, we've got about 30% of people saying that yes, they are. And I would be very interested to know, if you want to just pop it in the chat real quick, tell me which ones that you happen to be using. I see someone saying about the BPC 157, which we are going to talk about today. Let's see if anybody else. Epitalin, there we go. Fantastic. Yeah, that is wonderful. Our next question, which of the following benefits of peptides are you interested in? So there were some choices. We have weight loss, about 30, a little over 30% of you are interested in that. It looks like the majority of people, there's three in particular. Cognitive enhancement seems to be our number one interest of using peptides. Then we have longevity, muscle health, recovery. Those three are our top winners here. Then we have skin health, wound healing, and other. So for those of you who said other, I would love to see if you can pop that in the chat and let me know. I'm taking a look and I'm seeing some of the other peptides people are using. Thymosin beta 4, we have GHK-U, which I think you mean CU for the copper base. Tirzepatide, yeah, wonderful. So you guys, I'm sure you've done your homework too before you started this. Our last question, what concerns do you have about peptides for health optimization? And it looks like our, well, three major ones, but our number one was cost and accessibility. And I hear you. With the fact that this is new, these are burgeoning areas of research and study, they always seem to be more expensive at the outset. But as science moves forward, as the capitalism of competitive infrastructure of selling products, prices will come down. It's just very, very important that you always do your homework, do your research, make sure that you're getting quality products, and always check in with your doctor before starting any of these. A couple of the other top interests and concerns are safety and side effects. This comes along with the research. The more research we have, the more clinical studies we have, the more we can find and have a robust background of, how is this affecting? What is the safety profiles? So far, safety profiles look pretty good. And it's still, though, something that, FDA and other regulatory agencies across the world like to have that robust research to back it up before approval is made. The next major concern is efficacy and scientific evidence, which gets scooped up into what I was just talking about. And then some of the other concerns, legal and regulatory issues, and then none of the above. Interesting. So that's wonderful, having that faith in it, but still, I will always say, make sure to do your research. So let's take a look and seeing some of the messages or comments people have about concerns and finding good quality injectables. Yeah. Use potential for sleep quality enhancement. Looking for optimizing fertility. Let's see, anti-aging. Yes, there's a lot of that with the anti-aging and longevity aspect. So it really starts looking into what about anti-aging and longevity specifically, and then you can really start honing in. Let's see, new peptides, wound healing. Yes, wonderful. Love these comments and questions. So
Talent is certainly one of those ones that was already mentioned that's certainly highly touted for the telomere benefits, right? As far as this longevity conversation, I would say that's one of the premier ones that people talk about. I've had multiple clients talk to me about it that are excited about what it can possibly do to actually lengthen the telomeres themselves, right? So it can potentially limit apoptosis, right? These things about the cell where they die off as we age, senescent cells and what have you. So that's one of those ones that I saw mentioned in the comments that's certainly highly touted for that particular thing.
Yes, and I'll tell you, I actually have people that I know who take that and they have enjoyed the efficacy. It is something, again, that is by prescription. You definitely need to speak with your doctor. This is not something you should just jump right into. Now, is there a particular peptide, Justin, or peptides that you find clients asking about or that you recommend? And if so, why? What are you finding is most popular?
Yeah, so the word recommend, even I of course have to put that asterisk next to it. Do your research, and this is something I'm going to tell you about, but I'm not telling you to do it or not to do it. You could take a fork and jam it in your eye if you choose to, because you're an adult, but that's not a recommendation I have. But you have sovereignty, right? So my respect for your decision making is always there. Um, there's definitely a couple that routinely come up, and there is some that I've dabbled in myself as well. I would say BPC 157 for sure. I mean, I've already seen it mentioned in the comments multiple times. I've utilized it, because I have a bit of a potential for leaky gut, within my genes, and that's always something to look at. So on your DNA 360 profile, check out that GSTM1 gene in your glutathionization profile. If you have 0 or 2 copies there, because it's a copy number variation, then yeah, I mean, you may have kind of a weakening and a wearing away of that gut wall. BPC stands for body protection compound, and it's actually an extract of human gastric juice. It's really the reason why your stomach acid doesn't burn through your stomach lining, right, and end up in your respiratory tract, which would be a tremendous issue. So, when they extracted it and they used it therapeutically, they found that it actually does have the capacity, the touted capacity, to restore and rebuild that gut wall. So that's really interesting. And that's one of those ones that I would say in conjunction with things like glutamine, colostrum, some bone broth, right? You can really help reinforce the gut wall that way. It also has these systemic effects as well. Right. So BPC is interesting because you can utilize it in both oral format as well as injectable. Were you to use it for the gut, I would say oral makes sense. You're going to swallow it anyways, and that's where it would effectively go. It's got other benefits that a lot of people don't know about, however, as far as things like angiogenesis, right? So building new blood vessels. It actually increases growth hormone receptor sites. That's what's in the literature. So it's not a bodybuilding thing by any means, but you can imagine the anti-aging benefits of having more blood vessels being created and more growth hormone receptors being created as well. I think leaky gut is huge. I think that it's a big problem, especially in the West, that can lead to all kinds of stuff downstream. So anything we can do to reinforce that gut wall is very, very useful. In the performance realm, there's an interesting one that I've been considering experimenting with myself for quite some time called 5-amino 1MQ. And that one actually operates more so on the mitochondrial system, but it's going to upregulate it in such a way as to increase athletic performance, possibly. I have to use all these buzzy words today because of the topic at hand. But yeah, 5-amino 1MQ, when I have athlete clients, they bring it up, and they bring up anything that can upregulate mitochondria. So those two for sure are very useful. One that I really am a fan of and have used, and I can say for sure has made a positive impact on myself, is carbon 60. That one, especially if you have suboptimal detox, right? So look at your GST-T1. If you're not detoxing at the level of the liver, then also look at your SOD2 pathway to see if you don't deal with toxins at the level of the mitochondria very well. Carbon 60 is 300 times stronger than vitamin C as an antioxidant. So they claim. I noticed when I started taking it that I had less breakouts. I got a lot of testosterone. Now and again, my skin breaks out. A little bit more energy, just less fogginess. There was a couple of sort of anecdotal things, but carbon 60 is a really interesting one when you look at the research on that. So I think those are my top three: BPC, 5-amino 1MQ, and then that carbon 60. Definitely. What about you?
Well, actually, before I jump into that, I'm going to offer some research behind that, like actually going, hey guys, there is scientific published research about this. So I'm going to rewind just a little bit and jump into the BPC 157. So like Justin was saying, it has a lot of different functions, benefits. He talked about angiogenesis. He talked about repair of tissues, the healing of, muscles, tendons, ligaments. Well, there was a 2010 a research paper in Journal of Applied Physiology that demonstrated how BPC 157 has the ability to promote tendon and ligament healing in animal models. Now, granted, animal models, but that translational science, that's where we start. I mean, when I did my research on, back pain and degenerative disc disease, I started with cowtails. That's where we start, is in the animal models. So there's also a 2018 paper in Current Pharmaceutical Design that looked at BPC 157's mechanisms and therapeutic potential for IBS and IBD, okay, inflammatory bowel disease. That's just two little sprinkle samplings of research out there on these. The other one, the 5-amino IMQ peptide. Now, first of all, this small molecule acts as an inhibitor of nicotinamide N-methyltransferase. And basically, this is an enzyme that's involved in the regulation of energy expenditure and fat metabolism. And, so basically, digging a little bit into, the weeds of the science on what you were saying, working on the mitochondria, working on metabolism. And it really has gained attention more for its potential in promoting weight loss, improving that metabolic health, as well as enhancing muscle function. And, what the focus has been, where they look at that for these overall metabolic parameters, they have research published in Cell Reports. There was a 2018 study that showed that it inhibited the NNMT, that nice long word that I was telling you earlier about, nicotinamide N-methyltransferase, and how it works with improving oxidative metabolism, leading to that improved muscle function. So like I said, there are others, other papers, another paper that came out in 2020 in Nature Metabolism, as well as one in Diabetes, Obesity, and Metabolism, which reviewed this, looking at its therapeutic effects, for these metabolic disorders. So like I said, this is not just people, just running with the bandwagon, even though, yes, they can, but it is based in science. And the more research that is done, the more accessible it will be, the more information we will have, prices will start coming down, information will be shared. So personally, I do recommend BPC 157 simply because it is in a form, like you had said, in pill form. The majority of the others are injection, subcutaneous injection. And the nice thing about the BPC 157 being in pill form, it is available on FullScript, which is one of the platforms that we recommend supplements to. So that I feel very comfortable with. I've had a lot of clients have great results from it who have had a lot of leaky gut issues and other issues in conjunction with other aspects that you talked about, the colostrum, the bone broth, glycine, things like that. So there are things that can help, and especially when looking at your DNA. We want to see, what is it that you are working with? How is your glutathione conjugation pathway? How able are you to clear toxins from the body that can disrupt your gut biome and therefore gut integrity? And we talked about this in yesterday's webinar about gut-brain health. So, there are other aspects that play a part, especially in muscle regeneration, and how well do you build muscle? How well do you retain muscle mass, lean muscle mass when working out? Well, we can actually see that in your DNA reports for your hormone and fitness reports, looking at what type of hormone profile do you have? Are you androgen dominant? Are you estrogen dominant? Do you produce more toxicity with estrogen metabolites, because the clearance of that and the ability to repair, possibly with the use of peptides, this is something that, you can take a look at, that, people, providers can help you decide on what is the best one. So let's jump into a couple other peptides that we had mentioned about. Let's go with muscle growth. Since I was just talking about hormones, let's talk about muscle growth. Which ones have you heard of or researched on your own about peptides for muscle growth?
So I would say the main ones that you hear a lot about, and you can do combinations as well. I mean, you can look into combinations as well for these kinds of things. I think the combo of ipamorelin and tesamorelin is one of the more powerful things that you could look at, because it operates on this growth hormone pathway, right? So you just mentioned our hormone profile in the DNA 360. Let's say you have a totally balanced report, right? A balanced profile. You're probably going to have some difficulty there, because that baseline testosterone conversion is not happening rapidly, where for somebody else it might be. So overall lack of androgens is going to make it a lot harder to put on muscle mass and maintain it. So ipamorelin and tesamorelin, they increase ghrelin levels in the body, and then they act as agonists for growth hormone, human growth hormone. And that not only stimulates fat loss, but can also increase muscle mass on skeletal tissue as well. And all the good things that come with that, the boosting of strength and anti-aging benefits and what have you. You can take just normal growth hormone, but if you're going to get that from your doctor, you're talking about one of the most expensive things you can possibly get. And it's real growth hormone actually comes from cadavers. And there's not a lot of companies out there that actually make real human growth hormone, but you can introduce an agonist and cause your body to release more of its own growth hormone. Ipamorelin and tesamorelin would be among those. You can take those in the AM as well as the PM. And between the two of them, you're really upgrading your growth hormone pathway. That's something that you could go ahead and stack potentially with something like the 5-amino 1MQ, because targeting both the mitochondrial systems as well as the hormone pathway. Now we're talking, right? As far as the muscle growth component there. So those would be, the main ones. I would say that MOTS-C is another one, right? It's MOTS-C. That one, I've heard of plenty of bodybuilders using that as well, because it has touted muscle growth as well as fat loss benefits. And it is actually operating somewhat on that mitochondrial system as well. So MOTS-C would be another one. I think those 3 or 4 with the 5-amino 1MQ, that's a lot of things that you would be throwing at your body for anabolism. What about you? Do you think there's any that I missed on that one?
Well, there actually is one that I've read some research on, and that's the IGF-1 LR3. And really, what it does, obviously promoting muscle growth, because it actually works through a particular pathway. I won't go into all the, little details on that, but really what it does is it leads, generally it works on the pathway that can lead to muscle hypertrophy and repair, meaning that the building of it. So benefits of this particular peptide: it prevents muscle wasting. It really supports that muscle repair, increases lean muscle mass. And the IGF part, what that means and what that stands for is hormone insulin-like growth factor. So again, insulin-like growth factor. This plays a critical role in growth and development, particularly in the process of cell growth, differentiation. It is something that works on promoting that cell proliferation, inhibiting apoptosis, which is cell death. So it's that growth. Okay. So that actually, there was the paper that I was reading and looking at was a 2021 paper out of Journal of Developmental Cell. And it looked at the IGF-1 LR3 promoting muscle growth and repair. So just a really interesting paper, especially, again, going back to my, PhD work in spine health. Your musculoskeletal system, they work together. So you want good, strong muscles to support your skeletal structure. And good, strong bones help with good, strong muscles help with good, strong bones, and vice versa.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And let me just say an asterisk real quick here as well about speaking to the athletes in the audience here, especially. There's this thing that we do if you're into bodybuilding or whatever, that you're really trying to activate something called the mTOR pathway, right? The mammalian target of rapamycin. That's an anabolic pathway that gets, activated when you take in a lot of amino acids, real protein heavy meals. And many bodybuilders, they refuse to do things like fasting because they're too worried about not activating mTOR for that 16 hours of the day. There's been, and this is really unfortunate, and there's many factors to this, but there has been a lot of high profile bodybuilders, unfortunately, passing away of recent. If you follow any of these channels, you'll know that. And there's a few different things going on there, right? But I would say one of the things that we need to be aware of with the bodybuilding lifestyle is overactivation of mTOR. If we're trying to make cells grow and grow and grow and divide as much as humanly possible, understand that there's a potential there for even cancer cells to be growing because we're activating mTOR over and over and over again. There's a balancing act between something like mTOR and another pathway called AMPK, AMP kinase. It's the antithesis of mTOR. When you fast, when you exercise, you can activate AMPK, and it will actually balance out an overactivation of that mTOR pathway. And that one that I just mentioned, MOTS-C, will help with AMP kinase. That is one of those pathways that it activates. So just be aware of that. We don't want to just divide the cells at will 24 hours a day either, right? Because that can have some longevity consequences. So if we're going to really put a lot of effort, eating 6 meals a day, 8 meals a day, I've had some friends that are savages and eat more than that are competitive bodybuilders. And over time, that can really weaken the metabolism. It can have a lot of other issues because you're kicking on mTOR too much and causing too much cell division. So we want to go ahead and take time to activate AMP kinase on purpose. Fasting will do that. Something like MOTS-C will also do that. So just know that if you're an athlete in the audience tonight.
Yeah, and even more so for actually a question here that Lydia had about IGF-1, would that be for anyone with cancer? And no, there's a lot of controversy in there because it is a growth factor, and cancer is uncontrolled cell growth. So yeah, that's not something that I would intuitively think would be a very good thing. So, again, always speak with your doctor, do your homework. I want to get into some of the peptides that a lot of people were interested in, and that was for cognitive function. Now, we all are trying to think better, faster, get out of that brain fog state. Of course, there's a lot going on there when it comes to hormones and other low-hanging fruit of lifestyle diet. And this is something that I want to really stress is that peptides should not be your first go-to. Always look at cleaning up the terrain, working the foundations in your diet, in your lifestyle. Are you exercising? Are you moving your body? Are you getting fresh air? Do you have a support system? Is your, are you managing your stress? What kind of toxins are you being exposed to? Because you can be throwing in these peptides, which can be very expensive, and you may not get much benefits out of it. That's because you're throwing it into a dirty fish tank. Clean the fish tank first. Then if you're still having issues, then start looking at more specific, biohacking tools or tips or, ways that you can help yourself. But let's clear those muddy waters first. So jumping back to cognitive function. There are a couple that have been studied when it comes to cognitive function. One in particular is called CMAX, S-E-M-A-X. And this particular peptide, it enhances neuroplasticity, cognitive function, by increasing brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which actually is one of the genes that we look at in your mood and behavior reports. We look at how well are you making and utilizing BDNF. So BDNF works with and encourages neuroplasticity. Your neurons, though, that ability to what fires together, wires together, repair after injury, okay? How well are you doing that? Well, CMAX actually helps to do that. It helps to improve memory, attention, learning capacity. They're a wonderful study. Actually, there was a couple of them in 2018 and 2020 in neuroscience letters and behavioral brain research that looked specifically at CMAX's cognitive enhancement effects. So really interesting studies in those two journals. Another one, and sorry for any mispronunciation, Selank, it's S-E-L-A-N-K. And this particular peptide, it acts in a way for a cognitive enhancer because it modulates neurotransmitter levels. Now, I talked a little bit about this, not the peptide, but about the neurotransmitter modulation in yesterday's webinar. And basically what that means is neurotransmitters. So you're talking about things like serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine. Okay, these neurotransmitters, it changes the amount of availability and how they are, how their ability to bind with the receptor. Okay, so that peptide helps to modulate, okay, so change the amount of neurotransmitters available. And why would this be important? Well, this can reduce anxiety. It can enhance your mood. It improves that cognitive function. And the research, again, a couple different papers. One was in the Russian Journal of Psychiatry and European Neuropsychopharmacology, and that confirmed Selank's benefits in improving mood and cognitive function. Again, fascinating, because I actually totally nerd out on that kind of thing because of my background in neuroscience in grad school. So is there any that you are familiar with that are more specific to cognitive function?
Yeah, beyond what you mentioned, and I would say the first one there, the CMAX, is probably the most common one that I've heard about, read about. There's another one called cerebral lysin as well, which I believe operates on a similar pathway. So that's another one that you could always look into as well. I just want to say, knowing that the gut is the second brain this is not a nootropic, but BPC 157, I mean, if you do have leaky gut and you also have brain fog, there's very likely a connection point there, right? So, we have the gut 360 test, for example, and it can show you these quote opportunistic species and how much of them may be elevated in your gut. If you have something like a candida species that's overgrown, it's possible that you have some kind of gut wall permeability issues going on there, and it's almost a guarantee that it's going to affect your serotonin, it's going to affect your neurotransmitter production. I actually have a little hack that I do for when I get kind of a midday brain fog, which is kind of relative to this discussion because we're talking about amino acid sequences. Sometimes if you get that midday slump, it actually can be due to amino acid deficiency because your body and your brain kind of burn through them throughout the day. So I just use a simple essential amino acid supplement, and I'll guzzle it, mid-afternoon when I start to feel that slump, and it picks me up, and it's independent of actual nootropic ingredients and it's independent of stimulants. But sometimes just giving your body the amino acids that are essential, which means your body doesn't make them on its own, even that can go ahead and fill in those gaps, let alone a peptide that's a really specific sequence of amino acids. But yeah, those two that you mentioned, and then cerebral lysin, those are the main ones that I'm aware of for sure.
Well, I see in the chat there was a question about which peptide is best for stroke recovery. And actually, this kind of ties into a few of the others that we were talking about, with mitochondrial health, oxidative stress, things like that. And that would be SS31. And it's also known as, okay, this is a mouthful, ilimepritide. And really what this is, it is a mitochondrial targeting peptide. It selectively binds to cardiolipin, which is a lipid found in the inner mitochondrial membrane. It stabilizes it and reduces reactive oxygen species production, which is a lot like, carbon 60 actually, taking these reactive oxygen species, these oxidative molecules, and gets them out of the cell to help. And very interestingly, in our reports, the SOD2 and GPX pathway, this is our antioxidation pathway, because SOD2 and GPX work specifically in the mitochondria to break down and remove these oxidants, remove it out of the body or out of the cell. So the SS31, it does help in preserving mitochondrial function and thereby preventing cell death. Now, granted, sometimes cell death is important because we want to get rid of old, worn out cells. But the fact that it does help with the mitochondrial and oxidative stress, it also improves muscle function and protects against ischemic reperfusion injury. Now, what the heck is that? What that is, that refers to tissue damage that occurs when blood supply returns to the tissue after a period of ischemia, lack of oxygen. That's something that happens in a stroke. It is lack of oxygen, a blockage to that part of the brain, of the body, and causes cell death because of that lack of oxygen. Well, when blood is restored, blood flow is restored, it can actually cause some injury and inflammation. And some research has shown how SS31 has helped with that. There was, it was in JCI Insights, 2017 paper. And what they did is they looked at SS31's efficacy in improving cardiac function and reducing that oxidative damage. Again, animal models, but in animal models with heart failure. So your cardiovascular system, which we have an entire report on, looking at how sensitive are you to inflammation. How's your hardware? How well do you How well is your system working for vasodilation to keep your blood pressure down? How do you deal with the clearance of toxins in your cardiovascular system? So looking at your profile to see how genetically you are predisposed, and then obviously looking at diet, lifestyle, these other factors, lowering your toxic exposures, but then, looking at some of these uh, peptides, there we go, looking at some of these peptides that could be, like a beyond item to enhance that longevity and, removing these toxins from the system. So are there any others maybe dovetailing off of that you can think of before we dive into some questions?
Not so much in the peptide realm. It would be more in relation to all the other biohacking gadgetry and things that we talk about. My baseline recommendation with that is that I need to know all of your genes to know what else I would do to work backwards from the problem, right? Looking at that entire cardiovascular profile, looking at your ApoE, looking at your 9p21, looking at your NOS3, right? Your nitric oxide in the first place. You just talked a whole bunch about circulation and vasodilation. I would want to know all those kind of things were I to really try to tackle it. But I think you nailed it on the peptide end of that.
Yeah. Well, I will say there is another one that came to mind, and that's TB500. TB500 is a synthetic version of thymosin beta 4. And I believe I remember seeing someone put that in the chat that they're either using it or had questions about it. And what does this do? It promotes healing. It increases angiogenesis and cell migration. So really, it helps with building cells, tissues, facilitating faster recovery from injury. It really promotes that wound healing, reduces inflammation, improves flexibility and muscle tone, because it also gets into that realm for muscle health and building as well. So that's one that, I have found very interesting. And again, some wonderful studies, even going back to 2007, 2008, in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology and another journal in Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences, that specifically looked at TB500's role in cell repair and wound healing. So let's jump over and take a look at some questions. By the way, I do want to throw this out there. For anyone in the audience, if you would like to ask a question in person, please raise your hand. We would love to bring you up, ask your question, and get some real-time feedback. So if any of you are willing to do so, please raise your hand. And while we're waiting for some people to do that, let's take a look. So one of our first questions, if you have, this is by Andrew. If you have a suboptimal or 0 copies of a gene, peptide can make up for it. So, okay, so basically saying, if there's one of the genes in his reports that is suboptimal or, 0 copy numbers, can a peptide help? Justin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that stems back to what I was saying right at the beginning of the call about this filling in gaps that we're trying to do. If we know, and let's operate under the knowledge that each gene represents a job that needs to be done. If you happen to be deleted entirely for a gene, we can operate under the assumption that that cell is not receiving the instruction that it needs to do the job properly. So I would certainly not go so far as to say make up for it, as our man Andrew said, but filling in a gap, right, and really helping to negate the downside of that. I do think that there's a heck of a lot of efficacy in the research with some of these peptides. Like I mentioned with carbon 60, if I have 0 copies of GSTT1, which is the liver, and if I have totally suboptimal SOD2 and GPX pathway, let's say I'm TT for SOD2, which is as slow as it can be, and then CC for GPX, which is as fast as that can be, let's assume that there's a lot of oxidants being created. Well, placing an intervention like carbon 60, a very powerful antioxidant, into the system, which otherwise it wouldn't be in the system, we've now filled in that gap, and we've improved cellular expression by improving that pathway. It's not going to be a one-for-one equation here, right? We can't totally fill the gap, but we can sure fill a lot of the holes, and I think that's where peptides, among many other strategies, can certainly come into play. So I hope that answers the question. It's a tool in a toolkit, and it could have some efficacy for sure for not having optimal genes.
Thank you for that. We have another question by P. Thomas asking, are there peptides that modulate endothelial repair? So for all of you out there, he's talking about that layer, that cellular layer, like the inside of your cardiovascular system and the gut. Okay, these are the cells that line that. But asking that modulate endothelial repair and healing pertinent to atherosclerotic lesions. So we're talking about atherosclerosis and, the damage that can be done on the arterial walls. And yes, actually, we've talked about them. That would be things like the TB500, that thymosin beta 4, because again, what you want is cellular growth, migration, angiogenesis. So that is the growth of new, blood to cells and tissues. Okay. So another one would be the VEGF. Now that's one we haven't mentioned yet, but VEGF stands for, which is VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. And that's a very well-known peptide for its role in angiogenesis and endothelial repair. And there's, wonderful research on that. Actually, Nature Medicine back in 1995, they did research that showed how VEGF was used to promote endothelial cell proliferation and new blood vessel formation. So yeah, absolutely. And again, BPC 157, that keeps coming up because of its role. When you're talking about the gut is your immune system. It is your ability to absorb the nutrients you get from your food. How well are you doing that? And yeah, off the top of my head, those are pretty much the ones that I can think of. So, all right, let's see. Next question. So, should we do MOTS-C during fasting? Justin, there's a question for you.
Yeah, and I just want to say hi to Marissa and Andrew here, because both of you have been to almost every one of these webinars that I've done, I must say. So thank you very much for the engagement on that. So MOTS-C and fasting are both going to activate that AMP-K pathway that we talked about, right? So counteracting the mTOR and that whole conversation. I am not aware of any research that suggests that there's additional benefit to doubling up on them, but fasting has its own list of benefits. MOTS-C has its own list of benefits. I don't think you have to worry so much about timing as far as doing it during the fast, but I do think coupling the two is going to have a really profound effect of activating that AMP kinase pathway. So I think it's likely a good idea if you are someone who's going to choose to dabble in MOTS-C, which I'm not recommending once again, but they're both going to target that same thing. And intermittent fasting, I've been a fan of for a very long time for almost everybody, unless you're an adolescent or if you're underweight. There's a couple of people that I don't recommend fasting to. But yeah, if you're going to fast and you're going to dabble in peptides, could be a great 1-2 combo. I also recommend pairing fasting with BPC 157 for the additional gut repair, because now we've given our gut a break from all that information and these things, these calories that it has to work through, and we're reinforcing the gut wall at the same time. So I think it's a pretty powerful combo for lots of stuff. Yeah.
So one of our other questions is by KB asking about, are there any peptides that can directly work on the MTHFR gene? Now, we do look at the MTHFR gene, but we actually look at the entire methylation pathway. That's in your anti-inflammatory reports as part of your DNA 360 reports. And actually, yeah, it's called glutathione. Glutathione is made up of 3 amino acids. It is called a tripeptide because it has 3. It is composed of the amino acids glutamine, cysteine, and glycine. Now, we, again, tend to look at these shiny new types of peptides when there are peptides part of our system, like insulin, like glutathione, that can do these basic jobs. And these are things that we can support through supplementation of glutathione that you can get over the counter, you can get on Fullscript. These are supplements, ways that you can support your glutathione conjugation pathway by creating the glutathione through NAC, N-acetylcysteine. It has that amino acid cysteine in it. And then other cofactors like selenium. And, what I'm saying is, please do not overlook what's already available and what we know works, because these are peptides. These are your foundations. So we need to support that. So those types of things will support your methylation pathway, will support if you have a suboptimal MTHFR gene. And we can't forget about things like SAMe. This is S-adenosylmethionine. This provides, it's a compound formed from methionine and ATP that directly participates in that methylation pathway. And it is the like master methyl group donor, okay? Because really that's what methylation is. It's just passing that methyl group, from protein to protein and, passing it around to do the job that it needs to do. So let's see. So we answered that. There's some other questions, Justin, that you want to grab. I'm going to take a look at the chat. And
yeah. So our man Richard here has asked a couple of different ones that are almost in the same subject line. So first, he asked, is there anything you would say would be a reason for someone to not use peptides, or does it depend on the peptide? I would say also, or the person. The second question that he asked is, he says, I believe Ozempic is also a peptide and other weight loss drugs. So they seem to be mass prescribed, but are they right for everyone? What are some of the risks coming up about them? So in the first place, peptides, there's so many of them, and there's so many different people with different scenarios going on, that by all means, all peptides would not be right for all people, right? We just mentioned that, let's say you already have active cancer cells, and something that's going to cause more cell division, for example, could certainly have some downstream effects. They even said that at one point about BPC 157, because of the angiogenesis. If we're increasing new blood vessels, and we're increasing growth hormone receptor sites, and our cells are already dividing rapidly, some people suggested that there may be some downsides to that. I believe it's been debunked more or less for BPC 157. Again, keeping our thumb on the pulse here of the actual research. But yeah, there could be some potential risks for stuff like that. Ozempic in particular, and if I can just get us in as much trouble as Kashif already has on this one, I'm not the biggest fan of using semaglutide peptides, because a lot of people are getting all this weight loss from it, but plenty of that weight loss, turns out, is coming from muscle mass in many of these people as well. Muscles are really dense and they're really heavy. And when we have a GLP-1 agonist, right, and we're suppressing hunger hormones, you can also really easily undereat things like protein that you require, right, to actually maintain things like muscle mass. So again, weight loss, is it necessarily healthy? Because is it fat loss? Are we getting a desirable body composition, body fat percentage? I would recommend looking firstly at your DNA 360 and looking at two genes in particular, one being FTO and another one being MC4R. We're actually genetically wired to have a certain satiety mechanism as well. So look at that if you are going to be contemplating a semaglutide type peptide. If you are going to go on something like Ozempic, I would recommend at least including some essential amino acids, something that's going to preserve your muscle mass, right? But there's other side effects as well associated with those kinds of drugs. So I don't really recommend them. I don't recommend weight loss drugs because I'm a coach and there's 100 million ways that we can lose weight in a more productive and positive way, especially once we know your genes and we know what your insulin genes are, your macronutrient genes. I just think there's better ways to go about it than just jumping on a drug or a peptide. So I hope that answers the question. There's every one of these is not going to be for every person. And something like Ozempic, I do think that there's healthier ways to go about it, just my opinion.
There was a question in the chat asking about, are there any peptides for psoriasis? Well, first of all, understanding what psoriasis is. So it is a chronic inflammatory skin condition. And really, it is that characterized by rapid skin proliferation due to that overactive immune response. Okay, it's oftentimes considered an autoimmune issue. So what we want to think about is, first of all, which ones that we have talked about that help as an anti-inflammatory. And thymosin beta-4, your TB500. Because remember, I said that this is a naturally occurring peptide that promotes tissue repair and modulates, helps to lower inflammation. Another one is thymosin alpha 1. And this peptide is also known for its immune modulating properties, and actually has some science and research behind it about helping to manage psoriasis. Because it actually works on enhancing T cell function, which is part of the adaptive immune system. So another one that we didn't mention, but that is good for psoriasis, is called LL37. That's actually an antimicrobial peptide, which also possesses anti-inflammatory properties. And actually, I think I saw, oh, here we go. Yeah, something, because I was like, wait a minute, I thought I saw someone say something about LL37. Yeah, Nina put in the Q&A, does LL37 work against bacterial infections? But her aspect of it is when there is antibiotic resistance. I personally don't know or haven't researched its efficacy in antibiotic resistant strains, so that I'm not sure. But, you know, considering the LL37, you know, is, you know, an antimicrobial, you know, yeah, I don't unfortunately have the answer off the top of my head for that one. So let's see. Let's do another question. People keep talking. This is from Richard. People keep talking about peptides as nootropics. Are they the same thing? Justin, you want to field that question?
Yeah, I'd love to, because there's a couple of moving parts to that, right? So on the one hand, because peptides are in such a gray area at the moment, and I don't believe they always will be, but at the moment they are in kind of a gray area regarding legality, right? And the capacity to prescribe. You actually can't do that in most places. So a lot of these companies actually have to market themselves as being a nootropic company, right? So they'll say, we're selling you nootropics because nootropics are perfectly legal. But then when you actually look into it, they are in fact peptides. So some people have to do these kind of workarounds in order to have a company that sells something like peptides, because these are not cleared across the board for human consumption. They are still considered experimental, right, for doing your own research. Same with things like SARMs. There's a lot of these little midway drugs that are kind of probably efficacious, but not perfectly cleared. So that being said, we did talk earlier about some that do in fact have cognitive enhancing properties, CMAX and cerebral lysin and what have you. So there actually are ones that function as a nootropic, but I believe a lot of them just have to be marketed that way because it's really a tough area for a lot of these companies right now. Anything that improves neurotransmitter production could be called a nootropic, right? Anything that increases BDNF and helps you with your cognitive function could be called a nootropic. There's things from Adderall all the way to, alpha GPC, natural and synthetic compounds can be called nootropics. But with peptides, that would be why. It's more of a workaround for the nomenclature.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Ryan is asking, we know tirzepatide can be beneficial for individuals with PCOS who are struggling with fertility. How long should they be off before conceiving? That, first of all, I'm not exactly sure. And it is not something that in my position that I would actually be recommending or saying, because that is outside of my scope of practice. For questions like that, being on them, being off them, the timing, I strongly encourage you, go to your doctor, go to the one who is actually seeing you or who has prescribed or, whatever, for these particular peptides. And this is where some of that controversy, some of that, regulation comes into play where, it's a little bit of thin ice at times. And we need to make sure that, as we are wading through, this peptide valley, that we are careful. So unfortunately, I'm not able to answer that question, but I thought it important to bring it up. So everyone knows that when it comes to more specific things like that, please do your research, go to your doctor, go to those that have the scope of practice to answer that question. But I do appreciate you asking. So let's move on to Margie. She's got a lot of wonderful questions, and actually some of which overlap here. She asks, can peptides help with knee bone on bone arthritis and severely worn down cartilage in a torn meniscus to avoid a knee operation? And then also she asks about, can peptides help remineralize bone, and can peptides help scrub blocked heart arteries? Because it's really important to get blood flow, when we're talking about cellular regeneration, which we've kind of been touching on all throughout. So, Justin, you want to kind of work off of some of that, and then I'll dovetail off of you?
Yeah, so it's funny. I actually have something of an anecdotal report from one of my clients here for actually a torn meniscus. So funny you mentioned that because, the second that you tear something, and the knee is complex, right? There's the ACL, there's PCL, LCL, meniscus. You can wipe out one of those things or everything across the board, and that's going to drastically impact the recovery time. Meniscus in and of itself is not the longest of the bunch there. Like an ACL is worse, but I did have a client who actually was supposed to have a meniscus surgery because they tore it, and they chose, not at my recommendation, we talked about it, they chose to utilize BPC 157 as well as thymosin beta 4, the TB 500. They injected it right into the friggin' thing. They did. And it didn't take very long at all. And it would seem as though the combination of those two peptides completely repaired the meniscus on its own, and they did not have to have surgery. Was it the peptides? Was it the collagen I had them taking and the friggin' PEMF and all these other things that I always recommend? You can make the argument that the peptides made a difference there. So I do think that there's some efficacy to some of these peptides that are there for healing. Those two would be the main ones. I do think also that there's an argument to be made for the growth hormone agonists that we talked about before, IPA and tesamorelin. You never know. That could also have some bone restructuring properties to it because growth hormone causes the growth of new tissues. So wound healing, I would say, is kind of on the board for those two as well. But that's just a funny little anecdote that I have because it was the meniscus, and peptides did seem to play a role there in the quickening of that process. So, yeah, BPC and TB500 would be the ones I would research regarding that.
So we've got another question. Kimberly asks, how about microdosing semaglutide for insulin resistance and immune dysfunction? I'm actually going to take this one because I recently listened to a medical podcast where this doctor, she was very much against semaglutides and prescribing or recommending to her patients. And again, that's not, within my scope of practice. But she found through more research that there were more benefits and it less of the negative side effects with microdosing, much, much smaller dosing. Now, I only can go by what she talked about on this. I have not done extensive research on, microdosing. I don't know how much scientific evidence has looked at that, clinically speaking. But an interesting question, and that you specifically asked about that. Unfortunately, I do not have, a better answer for you, but anecdotally and through this particular doctor's research, she did find that there were some benefits. But again, this is not backed by FDA or anything else. This is just educational.
Yeah. Well, I'm look at your genes for that as well, too, right? Always pair that because we do have a number of genes that are going to influence the insulin pathway as well as the immune system is always a trickle down effect from the detox pathway, all these things that we talk about. So I would honestly recommend a coaching program if you continue to struggle with that, because we can work backwards all the way from micronutrients to detox and various factors that are going to influence that.
There was a question in the chat, which I think, is definitely a valid question by Mona. And she was asking, is there testing that can give a snapshot of what a person may be high or low on for peptides? So therefore, supplementation can effectively aid in the system. And honestly, currently, there isn't any standardized test that provides any kind of comprehensive snapshot, especially of all the peptide levels in the body. I mean, in the lens of using supplementation for help or being able to do that. So there are several tests and methods that can help assess specific peptides, hormones, other biomarkers, or things that would be deficiencies in the body, and this is like, there's blood tests that can check for growth hormone and the IGF-1, urine tests, which can actually look at metabolomic profiling, and really it's a urine test that analyzes metabolites. This is an indirect measurement of peptide levels and activity in the body. There's saliva tests that can look at hormone peptides. I'm trying to think of some functional tests like stimulation tests. Now, these are tests that stimulate the production of specific hormones or peptides, for example, like, growth hormone stimulation test. And those can evaluate the function of your endocrine glands. So there are things, but it's not like there's the direct test. Oh, let's, for this wide variety of all of the peptides that we're talking about. Again, this is a young burgeoning field. And, there are so many other things that we can also focus on that are a lot easier as far as just looking at your genes, looking at your history, your lifestyle, diet. There are so many low-hanging fruit and other easier aspects that we can make changes to that can make dramatic differences in a person's life, health, longevity, without being so focused on this new shiny toy. So any other questions that you're seeing? Oh, there are a couple others. Okay, I know that we covered this already, but I don't want to totally ignore it. Marzina asks, what are some supplements that you would recommend pairing with semi-glutides? So let's just say someone's on it. So Justin, do you want to just quickly revisit? Because I know you had mentioned some stuff before.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of things to bear in mind. Like I mentioned, if you don't have enough amino acids, it's possible that with the appetite suppression, you're going to be losing muscle mass, and the scale on the number is going to go down, but not in a healthy way, right? We don't want to lose good stuff. We only want to lose bad stuff. So something like an essential amino acid supplement is very useful. I'm a fan of a company called Keon due to my man crush on Ben Greenfield. Uh, there's also MAP aminos that I know that you're a big fan of as well, Dr. Laura. So those would be great. There's two things that I would say can really accomplish something similar as well from a supplement perspective that you may want to either add on, or if you do choose to come off of a semaglutide, maybe transition on to these. So one is called Garcinia cambogia, and that is one of those ones that's difficult to spell and say, but it is an herbal extract that has been used in traditional Chinese medicine for thousands of years for exactly that, appetite suppression, with no known side effects unless you were to take the equivalent of a dump truck full. Probably some toxicity at that point, but that is going to be in a lot of these over-the-counter fat burners, and that's what it's there for, is appetite suppressant. I just don't shut up about ketones. You know, I think that they're great for a lot of stuff, upregulating energy systems. I took a shot before this podcast, actually, so that I have my words when I need them. But
Yeah, I should have taken it.
yeah, ketone IQ. That's a great one. That's my pre-webinar shot that I take. I don't drink, so I do a shot of that instead. And it has appetite suppression qualities, right? So a shot of ketones is great. You can go quite a long time without eating at all. Also, I mean, you know, if we want to go ahead and just be biohackers, bulletproof coffee, you know, it does help with that. If you are going to dabble in, let's say, intermittent fasting, and you choose to have a cup of bulletproof coffee at the beginning of it, it's not for everyone, but you'll notice you're a heck of a lot less hungry and able to complete the modified fast in that way. And you can double that with something like ketones if you really want to go crazy. So Garcinia and ketones, that's a great combination. This last question is once again from KB. And I was going to say, Dr. Laura and I did a great podcast just last week, I think, on mitochondria, where we actually covered urolithin A. You want to go ahead and take this one away? I know that you love urolithin A as I do as well.
Yes, I do. And actually, this it nicely closes out, you know, you talking about fasting, because that's one of the things your words. I needed that shot, that ketone.
I'm telling you.
Is that it helps to mimic the fasted state. So, okay, the question by KB is urolithin A peptide? And the answer is no. No, it's not. It is actually a metabolite that is derived from ellagic acid or okay, words here. This is where my Bell's palsy gives me a problem. Elegotannins. Okay, so these are compounds found in certain fruits and nuts, particularly pomegranates, strawberries, raspberries, walnuts, foods like that. And really, it's a polyphenolic compound, so polyphenols. So that structure is very different from peptides, which, of course, like we said at the top of this webinar, peptides are composed of amino acids. And really, it is urolithin A is produced by gut microbiota, and it helps to promote mitophagy. So we are talking about the self eating of the mitochondria. We really want to make sure that we are cleaning out these old, worn out mitochondria, as well as the old, worn out cells. And so this particular molecule helps to do that. And that's why I was saying it enhances that fasted state, or mimics the fasted state in doing that mitophagy. And of course, when we are cleaning out the old, worn out cells, that is a source of anti-aging, because it improves your cellular health, extending lifespan. So, and of course, it also works with anti-inflammation, and overall, obviously, increasing health benefits. So, I would like, if everyone wouldn't mind, really quick, did you find this webinar helpful? Did you learn something more, something useful? Let us know in the chat. Just say yes, no, or, not really, or, oh yeah. We want to make sure that we are giving you material, that we are here providing education and information that helps you, that helps to educate you, that empowers you in the discernment of information for your overall best health, to help you evolve into the best human you can be. So, oh, I love this. Yes, thank you so much. Love the love. Yes, absolutely. Wonderful. We are so thankful that you are here with us. We are only here because of you. And we appreciate you coming to our webinars for feedback, for your questions. Please keep them coming. I want to thank Justin, the ferociously handsome gentleman on our team, who's got some fantastic brilliance, the credentialed, well-versed in the work that he does. He's helped so many people, and we are so grateful to have him on our DNA Code team. So again, Justin, it is always a pleasure to work with you, to discuss and brainstorm ideas, and to help educate our audience. I plan on doing a lot more of these with you, so thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful evening, and I believe we have another webinar coming tomorrow, and definitely more next week, so we look forward to seeing you. Have a good night.
Likewise, Dr. Laura. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for showing up.